Hello, my name is Jaden Rhodes, and on today's episode of Race and Ethnic Relations in the Modern Age, we'll be discussing the importance of empathy and the role it plays in the larger quest of pursuing racial justice. Psychological studies show the term empathy is defined by one's ability to recognize, understand, and share the thoughts and feelings of others. This definition applies even to those different from one's own. Empathy plays an important role in race relations. It is required for different racial and ethnic groups to be able to relate to one another and recognize any shared struggles they may have. Although empathy is an advantageous ability, it can be difficult to attain. There are many forces working against the process of becoming empathetic. A lack of education and the rampant spread of stereotypical imaging, misrepresentation, and racism in today's society makes it difficult to become empathetic and maintain that state of empathy. Empathy, unfortunately, requires some level of education. In order to understand the plight of another person or a different racial group, you must be aware of the struggles they face, why they face them, why it is difficult for them to exist and persevere in today's current society. The education required for an empathetic mind is not always accessible or promoted by a certain area's political climate, and this requires the efforts of individuals to make its way to the forefront. The reading Think, Race and Ethnicity by Mona Scott mentions a 2004 study conducted by Ann Peterson, Jamie Bevan, Ian Walker, and Brian Griffiths. This study was meant to examine the role that empathy and guilt played in prejudiced thoughts and feelings towards the Indigenous peoples of Australia. Several statements were given to participants regarding the Aborigines people. The text states, first, the study showed that the less educated the test subject was, the more likely that person would be prejudiced against Indigenous Australians. Second, the less empathy an individual exhibited correlated with a higher level of prejudice against Indigenous people. And third, the less guilt an individual felt for the plight of the Indigenous, the more likely that person was to feel prejudiced against Indigenous Australians. Before we delve into interpreting the conclusions made by this research, let's take a quick commercial break.
Looking for radically different titles to add to your Kindle library? Available now as a Kindle ebook, Radical Empathy: Finding a Path to Bridging Racial Divides. Structural racism has impacted the lives of African Americans in the United States since before the country's founding. Although the country has made some progress towards a more equal society, political developments in the 21st century have shown that deep divides remain. The persistence of inequality is an indicator of the stubborn resilience of the institutions that maintain white supremacy. To bridge our divides, renowned political scientist Terry Givens calls for radical empathy, moving beyond an understanding of others' lives and pain to understand the origins of our biases, including internalized oppression. Deftly weaving together her own experiences with the political, she offers practical steps to call out racism and bring about radical social change. Available on Kindle now.
Welcome back. As a recap to the first half of the podcast, we discussed what empathy is and its role in understanding the plights of other racial groups. In this half, we'll talk about empathy's role in the pursuit of racial justice. Right before the break, we talked about the 2004 study by Ann Peterson, Jamie Bevan, Ian Walker, and Brian Griffiths that was meant to examine the role that empathy and guilt played in prejudiced thoughts and feelings towards the Indigenous peoples of Australia. It was found the less empathy an individual exhibited correlated with a higher level of prejudice against Indigenous people. Think, Race and Ethnicity defines racial justice as a virtue of moral philosophy that refers to the concept of creating a society that is founded on equality and solidarity. It then makes sense to assume that the more empathetic a population is, the easier the path is towards racial justice. Although it's true there's a lot of work to be done before every racial and ethnic group is deemed as equal, solidarity solidarity is just another important facet of racial justice. It just so happens that solidarity is also fueled by empathy. The American Psychological Association states that there are several ways to cultivate empathy. One of these is a desire to become more empathetic. Although this is a more individualized factor, access to education can help bring up this desire in the broader population. Another way to cultivate empathy is to adopt a growth mindset. A growth mindset is cited as a thinking approach that sets challenges or roadblocks as opportunities for one to grow. By utilizing a growth mindset, we are more likely to continue pursuing empathy even after we fail to do so in certain situations. That's all for today. In today's podcast, we talked about what empathy is, the factors preventing empathy development, its tie-in to race relations, and how we can use empathy as a tool to drive forward racial justice. Thank you for listening, and please tune in next time.